Yeah. Okay. So this is in the world of the images section. Let's set it up a little bit. This is the paragraph. I think I read some of this at the end of class last time, but it's the paragraph that begins with "wherever freedom is in play." Right. Okay. So I'm gonna just to I like playing baseball rather than t-ball, and so you got to get some momentum. You don't want the ball just to be standing still, and then you hit it. You got to get some momentum behind it. So we're gonna read a lot just to kind of get things moving. So let me frame this discussion of faith and knowledge. It comes on the scene on the previous page, but we have to okay, summarize the previous page or the previous little bit. He talks about faith is meant not as having to do with like a vacillation or a vacillating between opinions. So faith isn't so much like this thing that has to do with shifting or changing from this, and then now you kind of shift over to this or what have you. So it's not like a conjecture, right, and an opinion as he calls it. Those all have their place, but it's not what faith is. He says faith, by contrast, is an essential component of intellectual knowledge. Okay. Also, a little bit later, he talks about the ever more certain knowledge generates ever stronger faith, because the ever new experience of the certainty of truth gives rise to an ever new readiness to entrust oneself to the movement of truth. So it's like, and this is going to come up in the Truth of Situation chapter a little bit, but the more that you know, rather than thinking of that as a way of diminishing what we'll just call faith or trust or type of certainty, the more you know, the more evidence you have for faith, and so that it's like what knowledge is I guess akin to like hindsight. So you know where you have come from, metaphorically, where the background conditions would be another way to put another metaphor. You know the background conditions, which gives you a better focus on the foreground. So it's not like the knowledge takes away the faith. It intensifies it. One more example on the level of like personalism, which is kind of the context of this whole chapter. The more you know someone, the more certain you can be about things that aren't known about them. So the more you know about a person, the more certain you can be about things you don't know about them. Like, you can put it in terms of contingencies. Like, this is like the cliff that people need to jump. No, that's a bad metaphor. This is the ravine, the gap that people need to jump. You're not going to when you get married, right? This is where I was going. It's because like you hardly know the person you get married to. Like hardly ever do engaged people think that they really understand. No, sometimes actually they do, but they're gravely mistaken about that they actually know their fiance or their spouse. I still am like puzzled by my wife, and we've been married for almost 15 years or so, about 15 years, and it's sort of an absurdity to think, how did we get married? Why did we make that commitment? We didn't really even know each other. I mean, in the grand scheme of things, people that have been living with someone for a longer period of time than they had been alive prior to that marriage, it's kind of an interesting thought. At what point is like tipping scale. Like, okay, now we've been married longer than I've lived by myself or lived alone, right? And then you kind of think, but how in the world could I have made this commitment with only like 9 months of familiarity with you? But this is why knowledge and faith, I think, kind of serve each other, because knowledge is like, you have enough evidence. You do know that person to a certain extent, which is sufficient to ground a type of, we can call it a type of trust, but it's something deeper than just this opinion type of trust. This certainty, and it's not the case that they're going to fit exactly how they are now. Hopefully, I'm not like I was when I got married. Right? Most people change very significantly and radically throughout their lives, and so you marry a person not because they're going to stay like that forever, but there's enough knowledge of like the trajectory of their life that you can like be certain that however this individual changes, it's someone that you can be wedded to be committed to, and so I think that would be an example where knowledge serves faith. I don't know if that makes sense, but it actually makes the faith stronger. And at a certain point, it has to be a matter of faith. It can't be undone. You're always. I don't want to say it's a gamble. It's not a gamble. But when you get married, or if you join a religion or take the final vows or whatever, it's not. It's like the best thing we have to faith. It's a type of just wholehearted commitment, which is perfectly rational. It's not like this whimsical thing. There's reasons. You have good reasons to get married to someone if you're going to get married to them, hopefully. And those reasons, however, are never so strong that you say, okay, now I don't need to make it something like an act of faith. If you're waiting, this is like why people hate vocational discernment, because we a lot of times want to have that whispering in the wind that takes away the aspect of faith, and it makes it so clear that you don't really have to even make this a decision. It just becomes like a necessity in a way. And like, okay, it's not a decision that I'm making, it's God's making it, and here's the whisper in the wind, and it's just so obvious. And I think it's like that would be an analogy or an example of thinking that knowledge would be like reducing faith or taking the place of faith. I don't know. Does that kind of make sense? But this is the case with all. I mean, so this is the case with all things, and this is what's happening in this section where I was going to read. It's the question of the deeds, the actions that individuals have, as constituting the evidence, the knowledge, the proof of what they are. But it's, I mean, what a tortoise isn't simply what you see or what you weigh or I mean, it's like that's all evidence that is used to help frame this understanding of the nature of a tortoise. And what's strange about the nature of a tortoise is that it always exceeds what any particular tortoise is. And so there's something, I mean, I think this is sort of what he's trying to say. There's something like an act of faith that's based on knowledge, but it's an act of faith in this sense, that like you come to know something in a way that's different from the way you come to know what's just like concretely given to you. So it's almost like an inference but it's an inference that isn't like a conjecture or postulation or anything like that. It's almost, you're more certain of that than you are of many other things. It's the best sort of theological example I can think is John and Andrew, maybe all the apostles, but I think it's Peter. It's Peter. Peter says something like when all the apostles, or all the disciples, not all, but a lot of the followers, disciples, start leaving Jesus, and I think this is over his John 6, the bread of life discourse, and they say, are you going to leave too? And it's almost like we're so committed that we don't even know what else would be, what life would be if we were to leave. And not that this really makes sense, but it makes more sense than the alternative, because the alternative is just complete lostness, wandering. I don't know, darkness. I don't know. I'm trying to think what the noun version. Right, and that type of faith is a faith that's a certainty that's almost like it's stronger than what they even understand. I don't know. Does that kind of makes sense? I mean, another, in the context of miracles, it's like your eyes. If you experience a real miracle, you should always think that your first thought should always be, this cannot be happening. I mean, it's like contrary to your expectations, but there's something, I think, about the commitment to that makes you have to say, no, not that my eyes are right. To believe in a miracle, you kind of have to say the evidence was insufficient. The evidence pointed in a direction, but it kind of fell short. Otherwise, you're always going to doubt. You're going to hold on to the senses, and you're going to say, no, this can't be how things go. Anyway, I think that's the point of trying to link faith and knowledge up with each other. Yeah, true.
So what would he say then about, what would his response be to something like Thomas Aquinas? Because unless I remember wrong, Aquinas does not think that. He would say that scientia destroys faith.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, assumedly he's pulling partially from Paul saying that, faith and hope will pass away.
Yeah.
But it seems in Balthasar's context, then when we reach heaven, we would still have some aspect of faith.
Yeah. And I think there's an equivocation on what he means by faith here, and in regards to the theological virtue of faith. I think this is rooted in that the more you know something, especially if what you're knowing is an infinite, limitless, the more you know it, and you only know things in the kind of the discursive way, is through limitations, right? Through essences. You come to know being through essence, which is a limitation on being, a particular situation, so to speak, of being. And so the more you know that, is an opening to knowing what you don't know. So I think part of the idea is knowing creatures is an analogous act to knowing God. And what it is to know God is not to culminate in this act of comprehension. Okay, I see God face to face. Heaven's great, but it would be great if you had heaven plus a little bit more, because like I've gotten to the end of truth, the end of goodness. I've achieved seeing God face to face. A lot of times this is when people kind of think like, well, won't heaven get boring after a while? At least one aspect of the tradition, sort of following an Augustinian and kind of a Cappadocian understanding of the beatific vision of heaven, is that it's an ever newness. Actually, Balthasar gets into this. It's like the moment of birth, eternally, right? I mean, so it's like what we say about the relationship between the Father and the Son. It's not that the Father ever has finished begetting the Son, or the Son has ever been finished being begotten. It's an eternal act. So in some sense, it's always new, and therefore it's like it's an eternal openness. The act of knowing could be seen as like, or thought of as like the corresponding or the correlate to that. That to know an infinite must always be an act which concludes with an openness, because otherwise it would relegate it to the finite, or to the limited. So to know what's infinite is to know it in such a way that necessitates there being more to know, and that's why I think he has this emphasis, Balthasar does, on the intensity rather than the extensity, like the extension, like the breadth. It's not like to know something like, okay, I know this, now infinite knowledge would be to know it, and then you have to add something else. Now I throw, a second person. I know this person perfectly, but if I'm going to have infinite knowledge, I have to have an infinite number of things. And I think what Balthasar is trying to say is, to have infinite knowledge would be to know one thing with like an infinite intensity, or to know it in its depth, which was, and this is the point of the section, it's an infinite depth. All things have an infinite depth, such that you can never exhaust what can be known about them. And we tend to get tired and worn out by that, and so we make abstractions, and we then, and we kind of have to do this. This is how humans have to kind of function, but we have to treat things as abstractions. But when you treat them as abstractions, you're treating them under various limited, in limited ways, and that's what essence is. Essence is limitation, and so I think there's something like, although the words can easily get you in trouble here, there's something like faith in the sense that the knowledge of God is not a knowledge that will come to an end. And so I think what he means by faith here is something like this, this certainty about an openness, this open certainty. It's like I'm certain, I have knowledge, or I'm certain about my life with my wife, but that is not a certainty that I can like easily articulate. I can barely even fathom what the rest of the day is going to be like with my wife, let alone like the rest of my life. But that's nevertheless the case, that there's still a certainty of the broad structure, which is this union or this love or this commitment or what have you, this certainty of my life in hers and vice versa. So I think it's something like that, where to know a person is always going to be to approach something that has an infinite depth, and therefore the knowledge of a person is always going to take on something like an aspect of faith, because of that very fact that what you receive from them that you could articulate is only going to be a manifestation or a showing or a limitation of them. a deed. It's going to be a deed, and you love the doer, not the deed. And so like there's So I think that is slightly different from what's going on in talking about faith as like a theological virtue or something like a through a glass darkly. I think what Balthasar would probably say is that to see God face to face, not to see him through a glass darkly, is to comprehend the infinite mystery of God, which necessitates knowing God as infinite, which is like bordering on like contradiction there. It's not contradiction, but you're getting really close, because it's to know God, which we kind of want to say, okay, there it would be to place him under the domains of essence. But that's not what he is, because he's infinite, and therefore it's a type of knowledge that must exceed itself in its limitation, and therefore it's gonna kind of be a perfection of faith, not like the loss of it.
So he wouldn't say that faith is, and again, this is Aquinas, but so that faith is the will assenting to something and then forcing the intellect to assent to it. You would say it's an intellectual activity as well.
Well, I mean, I think there's a lot of. I mean, I don't really know, to tell you the truth, about what Aquinas would say about that. But I think there's a lot of ways you can talk about faith, and the tradition does talk about faith. Aquinas' particular views on this, I'm not entirely sure. But I think what Balthasar is doing here is he's trying to introduce this idea of faith, which you get kind of on like an everyday level with how we interact with other individuals. And you recognize when you interact with other individuals, you have to have this openness to the meaning of that the truth, the real meaning, we'll just put it, of that individual. But that openness is something that has to come by way of knowledge, what you know about them, right? You can't really have that type of faith in an individual that's just a complete stranger to you. Putting this in sort of concrete experiential terms, for me, it would be like, it's hard to have a conversation with strangers because you don't really know enough about them. It's hard to really know what questions to ask someone because you don't know you don't know who they are. You don't really know what they are. And so it's almost as if they're not really a mystery to you in the fullest sense because they're so unknown to you. You have to know something about a person to be able to then inquire. And the more that you know about them, oh, you're from Michigan too. Oh, well, did you go to this high school? And then it kind of like, there's more about that individual's life that becomes, I don't know, potential for mystery. It becomes potential for inquiry, and that is preceded by a type of knowledge. Now, the fact that you know they're a person, that's an entry point, right? Oh, this is a person. I can ask you a question. But if you don't know they speak English, that's gonna be a stumbling block there as well. But I think the idea is the more you know about them, the more you're going to be able to enter into the depth of their existence. And so the quote faith, in that sense, that you have or see in them, or that you have in them, or that you I guess you could say the faith in the fact that they have a truth, they are true, right? Is going to intensify the more you do know about them. They have a meaning, and that meaning becomes clearer and clearer. Precisely, also in its becoming more confusing and strange to you, the more that you learn about something. You get little bits and pieces of people's lives. This is how humans are, right? You get little bits and pieces of people's lives, even these people around you that you call like your dear friends. Like you have little bits and pieces, and we tend to think we know all of our friends in college so well, and we do know them fairly well. But there's a lot that you don't know about them, right? And I think what you're trying to do is you're trying to piece together this understanding of them. A lot of times we make presuppositions and presumptions about the people that we think we know so well, to the detriment that it actually kind of we treat them as an object of knowledge rather than in this context as an object of faith. I don't know. I think that is. I think what he's saying is that's a human experience that we have in coming to know persons, and that is what is perfected in the knowledge of God. Ultimately, it's this very similar type of aspect. Last thing, I was going to talk about this example later on in the chapter, but I'll just mention this, and then we need to move on to the truth of situation section. How many people are physics majors in here? Just one? Any others? Okay, my guess is Virginia can be far more puzzled by the physical world than all of us can, right? We're kind of confused by the physical world, but I'm just going out on a limb that Virginia is more puzzled by the physical reality, the physical nature of the world than all of us. And it's precisely because she knows more about it, right? My understanding of the physical world is, pretty. It's like, suppose you couldn't sleep for a couple nights and you stayed up and you watched reruns of PBS, Earth or something. I don't know. Okay, that's my understanding of the physical world, which is wow, yeah, that's kind of a crazy place we live in, right? I don't really know a lot about this. I thought I took a lot for granted, but I realized it's kind of crazier than meets the eye. But when you start to become a master or an expert at something, we tend to think, oh, that person has the answer key. They have access to the answers in the back of the book, so they know more than I do, and therefore they're less confused than I am. But that's not typically the experience of experts. The experience of real experts, when you really not like fake pseudo experts, but like real experts, really wise people, are people that know how completely full of it they are. You can read some of the works of the philosophical works of Heisenberg, and you realize he's a very, very poor man. He knows a lot, but you hit this wall when you realize I can't hide behind other people's ideas and other people's thoughts. And I really come to this understanding of we don't really know at all. A lot of us can hide behind oh yeah, no, I don't know because I'm stupid with math. But Dr. Matarak, he knows. He can see the world as it really is. I'm just stupid because I didn't really pass Calculus 2. And so, I don't see it. And you think Dr. Riches, he knows God. He's a theologian. He's a man that really knows God. If only I could have read the books that Dr. Riches read, then I would know God too, right? Because he really sees God as he is. I'm stupid. I didn't really pass Bible school, and so I'm working hard at it. The thing about a lot of this is the more you know, the more you realize. Not just that the particular theories are wrong, but there's something about the subject matter itself which doesn't admit of the type of knowledge that I thought I could have. Right? It's kind of stripped from your grasp. It's pulled away from you, and therefore you're kind of left scampering in the dark. Right? And this is the at least in the theological context, this is the movement from kind of systematic theology into mystical theology, when you recognize the subject matter itself is the problem. It's not that we haven't had enough good theological training. It's the subject matter. And I read this book by this physicist, Italian physicist, Carlo Rovelli, I think is his name. Have you heard of Carlo Rovelli? He has a book called Reality is Not What It Seems. It's a great book. But he ends by talking about the mystery of reality. He does quantum gravity stuff, which I don't know anything about what he was talking about in this book. But he ends with this reflection on the fact that what wakes him up in the morning, the whole reason he does physics, is because he realizes that he's in a worse situation. I mean, it's a paradox. A worse situation now than he was when he was in grad school, right? In grad school, he had all these like I can master this, and now he realizes I can't master this. So he has to start anew every day, and it's this completely new territory. It's like an explorer who realizes there aren't any continents left because we sailed around the world. There are no continents to go to. And if all of a sudden they were to wake up and realize, wait a second, there is a whole fourth dimension that hasn't been explored, and it's wait a second, there's something completely new. That's that experience that I think is the experience of faith, which is built on this type of faith, right? Which is built on knowledge, right? It only is made possible in light of knowledge. I'm too stupid to be puzzled about quantum gravity. I mean, I can be puzzled by it because I don't know what the squiggles mean, but that's different from knowing the squiggles and knowing it all and being I don't know what the hell that means. You know what I'm talking about? Okay, so that's my experience of my little area. I'm not a specialist in anything other than perhaps rambling, but the little bit that I know in philosophy, that's been my experience. I thought I was going to solve all these problems in certain areas of metaphysics, and the more that I think about it, the more I realize what I was hoping for was the problem, right? It was because the subject matter itself didn't admit of the answers that my method had, and so then you come to this realization that there's something about the method which is the limitation. Okay. All right. What does it mean to talk about truth as a situation? What's a situation in the context of truth? Yeah, maybe that's I don't know. There might be a better way to frame the question, but the section's titled "Truth as Situation." What does that mean? Any thoughts? You can be wrong. That's okay. There's nothing wrong about being wrong.
I'll give it a shot. I understand it as this subject's relation to the environment. So it talks about perspective and personality.
Yeah.
So how the subject. So this is kind of a question.
Yeah.
Does how the subject relate to the object? Does that reveal something about the object? So it's we're talking about perspective. If we're talking about I don't know, your red water bottle thing.
Yeah.
If each of us has a different perspective, does each of those perspectives reveal something about the water bottle?
Yeah.
Or is that
Yeah. This is philosophy lab. Isn't this great? You didn't have to pay a lab fee though, but okay. Yeah. So.
That's kind of how I understand it. Subject relation.
Yeah. So good. I think that's definitely on the right track. So it's everyone. I mean, just stick with the context of perception, and we'll move to deeper forms of knowing or other forms of knowing, right? So, but just stick with perception. Everyone has a different perception of their water bottle. Coffee thermos. We'll make it a thermos. It elevates it a little bit. Okay, so and we all recognize that when you have a perspective on the thermos, that's not the God's eye view of it, right? So you don't have the God's eye view of the thermos. You have the situational view. Your situational view of it is different from my situational view. But it's nevertheless the case that it's still one and the same thermos, which is seen from various situations and various vantage points or what have you. Okay, and I think what he's trying to say in this context is we a lot of times want to say or want to think, if we're going to know this thermos objectively, we need to have the bird's eye view, or we need to see it as God sees it. And I think what Balthasar is saying here in an interesting way is in the God sees it as creator, which, okay, good luck having that vision of the water bottle. The best you can do is have an analogous participation in that, which I think we're going to get to in the next chapter. So you kind of have to give that up, which is you have to give up your hope of being God. Okay, you're not going to know things in the type of objectivity that God knows things. So that I think is what he's saying. You need to give up. Rather, but that also frees you, because what it does is it says to know the thermos then is not to occupy some privileged perspective on it, which we could call like the objective perspective or the God perspective or something like that. In fact, like the way that the thermos would be known, given that the thermos is a creature, the way that God would know the thermos, according to creaturely terms, would be as a creature, right? And so it would be like to have a particular perspective on it. So it's not just the fact that like truth, and this is he's talking in the created sense, right? Truth of creaturely things, not like God as truth, right? It turns out that like it's essential to seeing the water bottle that you see it from one and only one particular perspective at a time. Like you can't see it from all perspectives at a time. Even if you like put up all these mirrors and you think, aha, we've mastered it. That's like a fool's endeavor. Discovery Day project, right? This is a philosophy Discovery Day project. I'm going to see the thermos from all perspectives, and you like get these mirrors and you get grants from the college to do this. And no, you don't see it from all perspectives. You're seeing the thermos, and then you're seeing a reflection of it in the mirror, and then you're seeing another reflection of it in the mirror, and that's not the same as seeing the water bottle from all or the thermos from all perspectives, right? So I think the idea is you have to kind of recognize that you are in a. This sounds so markety. You are in a chosen perspective. All right, like you have the perspective on the thermos, which is the perspective of objectivity. And in a sense, like it could have been this way, and it could have been this way, and it could have been this way, such that there's like not like a privileged place. Like, oh, you come over here, and now you look at it from this angle, and that's the privileged place on it. And I think what he's trying to do is he's trying to show that there is no such thing as the God's eye view of the thermos. The thermos can only be known situationally. Right? Like, I want to know what the animal is in its pure form. I don't want to come to a knowledge of the animal through particulars. I don't want that. I want the pure, the 100 proof, just the straight up animal essence. And I think the point is, you can't do that. You have to know the animal or know anything through the particular. The universal is known through the particular. The sensible is known from a particular angle, and therefore, it seems like this relegates everything to like a subjectivity. Like, oh, therefore, like you can only have a subjective experience of it. But I think what Balthasar's point is, no. What this does, it actually redeems objectivity. It places the real objective understanding within each particular situation, because this is like the particular way that the thermos manifests itself as an object of knowledge in this situation, right? Does that does that make sense? It's like if I'm trying to everything that happens is a successful attempt to reveal what that thing is, even if you think it's like a botched attempt, right? This is what I love this about error that he talks about towards the end of the reading. He sort of towards the end of the reading. It's in the. I don't know if I can find this. Anyone remember where this was? Oh yeah, here we go. This is, it is towards the end of the reading. It's the paragraph that begins with, "This sheds some light on the nature of error." How about that? So error, we tend to think as detracting from truth. You're trying to prove something. This is not an accident, because the paragraph right before he's talking about Socrates. And Socrates was a man that was trying to prove many things in life. And what happens is, like, Socrates is probably the guy that would get the award for giving the most bad arguments in the history of his life. Right? No one has ever succeeded in giving so many bad arguments as Socrates has. But what's beautiful about Socrates is no one has ever also, he gets 2 awards. He gets that one, sort of like worst philosopher of all time, because he has like never succeeded in his arguments. But he also gets the other award, which kind of redeems it. It like counterbalances. Is that he's the guy that has come to realize that every argument he's given has also been a bad argument. Right? So think about the Phaedo. This is my favorite example. How many people have read the Phaedo? This is a dialogue about immortality of the soul and the pre-existence of the soul and all that mumbo jumbo. And okay, so he gives you all these arguments. He's trying to argue why the soul is immortal, and he gives you this and this and this and a handful of arguments. And his buddies start bringing up these objections, and then they come to realize, oh, you're right. That can't be true. That can't be a good argument. And Socrates agrees, and he throws the argument out the window, and he tries another one. The point isn't so much to avoid error as it is to endeavor to do something. So the whole point of these arguments is an attempt to do justice to something, so that like errors. I mean, this is cliche, and unfortunately, like Hallmark got a hold of these really like wise facts, and they put them on greeting cards, and then it completely like ruins like the fact. Okay, but there's a value in error, and I think there's actually something kind of interesting about this in the scientific method, because the scientific method proceeds by error. You succeed in a strange way. You kind of succeed by falsification in the scientific method. You're kind of looking to be disproven. You construct experiments in such a way that you can be verifiably tested as having that theory or that hypothesis be wrong. Right? That's what a scientific sort of experiment is intended to do. So you don't try to prove things as so much as you try to disprove things. And so error plays a very constructive key role in life. But I think the whole point of this is to even try to present something and to be deceived by it. Like, so you can think of like you're trying to say something and it doesn't come out right or whatever, and you think, oh no, that completely destroys everything. That the situation that is now real, the situation that's now occurred or that now exists, is going to be such that truth can still be manifested, right? And so it's almost like you can never do anything so bad that truth cannot be manifested. No error can ever be so bad as for there not to be the manifestation of truth, because nothing that exists can be so bad as to not exist, right? So there's this I think beautiful way of looking at what an error is, it's different from a lie, as he calls it. A lie is an error that is like deliberately held onto. It's like, I know this is a bad argument, but I'm going to still give it anyway because all these losers in the room, they don't see it as a bad argument, so I can deceive them, and that's what the sophist does. So an error is different from a lie, and that's why I said earlier when I asked this question, like, there's nothing wrong with being wrong, right? In a sense, if you're earnest and genuine, you can never be wrong. You can make mistakes, but that's different from actually like departing from the path of truth. To depart from the path of truth is actually to depart from the path of being, and I think this is the whole point of the section. So that truth is like manifested in all situations, and you have to be attentive to the particular situation at hand if you're going to know the truth in that situation. So like if I'm having a conversation with Jack, and I say something and he says something, and he says something that doesn't make sense, I can kind of just assume, oh, this is what he meant to say, and I can do that. Or I can kind of leave it open, like, well, maybe he didn't mean to say that. Maybe he meant something else, and I can kind of, instead of making this quick judgment on what the meaning of his thing was, I can kind of try to build it based on the situation. And so the way that you come to truth is going to have to be sort of sensitive to the situation, such that maybe he did say something wrong, and things don't square for me, and then I can stop and say, hey, you said this. Did you mean to say that? What do you mean by that? And that attentiveness to that situation actually thereby has the potential to manifest truth in a completely new way, right? A clarification question or clarificatory question is a lot of times going to take things in a way that would never have happened if that question had not occurred. And so I think what Balthasar is trying to say is there's something about just as there's an interesting relationship between the particular and the universal ontologically, there's something interesting about the particular truth, which is going to always be situational, the particular vantage point on the thermos, and the universal truth about what the thermos looks like. There's an interesting union between those two, just as there's an interesting union between the particular being and the universal essence or universal nature. Okay, so what goes for being goes for truth, I think, is what he's trying to say. And just as you can't really depart from the path of being, you can't really depart from the path of truth. In that same vein, doesn't mean you don't make mistakes, but it turns out that like mistakes themselves are, once again, here's the hallmarky cliche, mistakes themselves become revelatory of things that would not have been revealed were it not for the fact that the mistake was made. Many of the most important things I've learned were because I was a selfish person. And you learn about what it is to be a person in this error-filled way. But you have to be attentive to the situation of the error for it to actually be capable of communicating something, right? So that the error can be made good of. But that goes for all. I mean, that we're specifically in this context talking about the error, but for all situations, it's as if you need to be attentive to the particular perspective if you're going to have access to the universal truth. Just as you need to be attentive to the particular if you're going to be able to have access to the universal. Any questions? I want to talk a little bit about what he says about time, because this was trippy. This was really crazy. Any questions about stuff before he gets into time? The personality stuff. Anything about perspective or any of that? Here's one last thing to kind of put this perspective thing in kind of more concrete experiential terms for many of you. Many of you, I mean, every decision in a sense is a vocational decision, although we tend to have this aspect of like vocational decision as being about like, should you get married or should you become a religious or whatever. But every decision is a vocational decision in a way, because it's about the call of the good, movement towards the good. And the thing about human nature is we're free, and so you recognize that within the context of a person, there's something especially mysterious about the truth of what your vocation is. The truth of your vocation is in a way something that has to come from your own decision. Right? It has to be the fruit of a decision you make, because it's got to be the fulfillment of your free nature. Your free. Otherwise it's not really a vocation. It's just gravity, right? It's like what makes the keys go down to the table is what makes me, become a Carmelite or something. It's like no, that completely takes the whole like vocation aspect out of it. It no longer becomes an act of love or an act of seeking or an act of obedience or anything like that. So there's something about this mystery of like the person making decisions in such a way that they kind of become, I don't know the right words for it. They're completely contingent. They could have been otherwise, right? I could have married someone else. I could not have married anyone at all. Like that's contrary to Disney movies, that is the case. And I think it's precisely that is what also dignifies the fact that I did marry this person, right? And so I think to think about a vocational decision or any free decision as like trying to align up your action with what God wants of you is to try to think of your action as outside of the context of a situation, outside the context of what it is to be a person, right? To be a person is to make decisions based on the situation they are in a rational way that takes in evidence that they have about what would fulfill them, how they would most be happy, but not in a selfish way. And therefore it's like it's always going to be accompanied by a type of uncertainty, and I think that is the experience of making a good vocational decision. Like if you're like somewhat confident, but you also feel like this is like a great risk, then you're on the right track, right? That's like what it is to be a human making a free decision. Now, to be like, I don't know if I should do this, and you're kind of having all these doubts as you're going through, that's a different story, right? But it's this thing that I think it's the personal experience of truth being situational. It's the iteration for the human of what it is for truth to be a situation. What is the meaning of your life is another way to talk about what it is for the human to be true. The meaning of your life, in some sense, is up to you because you're free, right? This is like what's really radical about free creatures is that we participate in our own creation, and therefore it's going to be a matter of responding to the particular situation you're in. There's no universal abstracted account of like, okay, I need to just go. This is like what Descartes does, which I kind of think is funny. He like goes and locks himself in his room to think about his life. I think what this is saying is like that's a way of removing yourself from life to try to think about life, which is precisely to like not think about life. It's a form of subjectivism that is also radically objective because it's to recognize the objective fact of what it is to be a free creature, right? To be a free creature is to actually make decisions that matter, that have weight, that actually shape the course of existence, and that's to be a subject that is perfectly like, capable of recognizing the truth lies in the particular situation that he's in. rather than like, oh, whatever happens, it's going to all work out. That might be the case, but that's not something that you can like think is this abstract truth. Okay, any comments about that aspect of perspective and personality within what it means to talk about truth as a situation? Time. Okay, let's say something about time. Does anyone have any thoughts on this? This is in the last section, section 4. It begins with the paragraph, I don't know, 5 paragraphs in or so. Regardless of how we consider this movement in creaturely being, one thing is clear. The mysterious non-identity between essence and existence is intimately related to the phenomenon of time. Indeed, insofar as time is a fundamental structure of being, this non-identity is even coextensive with it. So another way to think of this is like everything that to be human is to be a temporal being. What's most unique about the human is that we're a temporal being that's capable of reflecting on temporality, and therefore we're capable of sort of stepping outside of time. Like we kind of have a foot somewhat in time and somewhat outside of time by that very fact that we can reflect on it. And Augustine gets into this all over the place in the end of his Confessions when he's talking about time and memory. Memory, I was sort of surprised Balthasar didn't go into this in more detail, or in hardly any detail. But memory is it's the eternalization of time. It's to take time and it's to eternalize it, so that like the past, present, and future in memory become sort of all interconnected. We tend to think of memory as the memory of the past, but I think what's happening with memory is we are capable of thinking about, or you so to speak, quote, replaying the past such that it becomes like a recapitulation, a recap, a reenactment. And this is what's so tormenting about memories, is that they kind of renew themselves, right? It's not like, oh, this is this thing that happened a long time ago, but it lingers. It like stays with you, and that's what's beautiful and at the same time painful about memory, is that it has this temporal share in eternity. But anyway, specifically the point about time is linked up with creaturely essence for the human, because it actually ties up with like philosophy of nature stuff. So what it is to be a human is to be something that changes, that undergoes, that's en route, right? So to know what a human is cannot be something that is thought about outside of the context or the domain of time. It almost like necessitates temporality, right? It's like think of a baseball game without time. You're like, what the hell would that be? Because a baseball game has a first inning, and then it has a second inning, and then it has a third inning, and then there's a pitch, and then there's a hit, and then there's a strikeout, and then you have this like, it's a temporal thing. Its being is temporality, right? And the same thing for a human. And so, like, wrapped up with the very existence of a human is that it be in time, that it be temporal. Okay, so I think that is an important aspect for the human, and so to know what it is to be a human cannot be to try to hit pause and think about a static thing, right? So this is what's crazy about natures, is that they're not static. Natures are like dynamic. They're self-changers in a way, right? And so they're to be known precisely in their self-changing. You can think of it as like the principles of nature are these principles that give rise to these self-changing things. But the being itself isn't the principles. The being is the temporal self-changer, right? So it's not a static thing, and therefore it's as if what's happening at all times that a being exists. Let's try to summarize all this okay. So here's beings only exist at the present. Okay? Concrete individual beings only exist at the present. But what the present only makes sense if it's a temporal thing, an entity, or temporal. We'll just call it thing to keep it generic. Is it's a union of past and future, right? So that like the present is in some sense where what has been and what will be kind of come hand in hand, because it's not like you have this little like length of time that we call the present. So that the present is this extended thing. The present is almost like an instant, and in virtue of being an instant, it's like a non-existent. It's like a point. Points don't really exist in a sense, in the sense of like duration. And so the value ontologically and probably even morally of time is found in the present, but it's precisely by that fact it's found in what unites what has been, which is in some sense the fixed unchangingness of things, and with what could be. It's like the necessity with the contingency, the necessity of the past and the contingency of the future is brought together in a way in the present, which is what makes the present moment both somehow necessitated but capable of being free, right? And so I think the point Balthasar is trying to articulate is this is uniquely capable of being understood or known by the human. I mean, it's true of all things, but not all things can know that this is the fact. The human is the only person that can take every moment and recognize it as a new, once again, hallmarky, I apologize. Every moment becomes a new beginning. Dr. J. Right? That's my saying for the day. Okay. But it's probably something that Heidegger said. I guess I don't know. But every moment, and this is where you get this interesting eschatological reflection towards the end of the reading, that what hell is for Balthasar is to be stuck in the past. There's no openness. It's an enslavement. The past has determined the meaning of the present, and by that fact it's determined the meaning of the future, because if the present is closed, then the future has no meaning, right? So to be in hell for Balthasar in this context is to have no way forward. It's to be stuck in the past. It's like the person who says no good could ever come of this. I'm thinking of like Raskolnikov. Of course I am, from Crime and Punishment. And, commits 2 murders, and it's as if like, what could become of life now? Nothing. I mean, maybe some of you have experienced this, maybe firsthand, maybe secondhand. If not, you will at some point. Something will happen to either yourself or to someone you know, someone you love, and you'll say, how the hell could life go on? How could someone live after this? And what I think Balthasar is saying is the person who is consigned to hell is the person who's committed to, who's chosen that closure, that there is no possibility that anything could come from this, and it's a way of sort of negating actually the creaturely existence, because the creaturely existence, from what we're just saying, is this temporal thing that always has this openness into the future because it's a temporal being. But it's the person who sort of cut themselves off in that way, and the person, he then says, who sort of analogously, I guess, who is in heaven, or who basically who is in heaven, is the person who sees in the present moment, right now, there's a newness that can be had. Every moment, once again, I apologize for the hallmarky. The present moment is the sufficient grounds for a new beginning, right? I mean, this is what's sort of crazy about when you find yourself going down, digging your own grave, putting yourself in a hole. This sometimes happens when I'm talking with my wife, and I realize, like, what I should just do is shut up and apologize. That's all I need to do right now. And I kind of think, like, I could do it. I could just stop and apologize. But then I think it'll kind of be awkward. Like, I'll kind of feel bad about myself, or ingenuine, or it won't feel authentic or whatever. And so I just keep going, and it keeps getting right. But it's kind of this recognition that, like, any moment you could just, like, end it right now. And it's tormenting for the human, because often we don't do that. And nevertheless, this is this possibility that we recognize. I think what Balthasar is saying is that at every moment there is that possibility. Since we're on the theme of Dostoevsky, I'll mention this in this context, because this is an experience that he had. He was put on a firing squad, not as a shooter, but as a target. Right? He was supposed to be executed. Did people know this? He was supposed to be executed, and for sort of mumbo jumbo political stuff. But he was. They were there. Apparently, there was, like, theatricized in a way. They did this sort of on purpose, but he didn't realize it. And they were getting ready to shoot him and a bunch of other people. And then all of a sudden, so the story goes, last minute, this guy came up with these orders that said, like, okay, they're supposed to be now sent to, like, 20 years, 15 years of, like, hard labor in Siberia. So he goes to Siberia instead of being killed. But he reflects on that experience where he was, like, literally counting the seconds to, like, his death, the end. This is it. Like, the lights are, like, he feels the water. This is like the psalmist. The waters are coming up to his neck. This is the end of it all. And then all of a sudden, it's as if, like, everything is just, like, made new. He's born completely anew now. And that actually was a really powerful event in his life, and he talks about it in some of his books. Not directly, but that experience he uses to, like, characterize a lot of events that happen to his characters' books as a type of, like, conversion or baptism or something like that, where it's this complete regeneration of the human person, and it's like a resurrection. You're like, you come to this death, and it turns out you don't think any new life could come from this, but all of a sudden it does. And what Balthasar is trying to say towards the end of this section is, this is the gift of existence. It's to see that every moment is capable of that. That's like the point of time. It's to have the rebirth. So it's like what happens in baptism, although he doesn't say this explicitly, I kind of think this is what he has in mind, because of where he's going with all this. What happens in baptism, you can see in a natural context occurring in the very fact of time. Because what time is it's the old. All of a sudden something new happens, right? There's a newness. It's not as if it's just, it's the same rerun of, Seinfeld over and over and over again. It's like there's something new. There really is something new under the sun. And I think that is the point of existence. And it's built into the very structure of our essence. It's built into the very fact of our contingent existence. And so like both aspects of us have that there. And so I think this is ultimately like the meaning of what it is to exist in a given situation, specifically in a temporal situation, is to have that experience. It's to see that as like the gift of existing, and you see the gift of existing kind of in the in generation, right? It's like only if I could be at the beginning when God created the world would I understand God's loving act of creation. If I could just see and hear Aslan sing his song and see Narnia come into existence, then I would know the gift of God and God's goodness. And I think what Balthasar is saying is BS. You wouldn't feel any different about that than you do right now, because right now that's what's happening. Like that's exactly what's going on right now. Is the past and the present and the future is precisely that thing. It's just like the lingering of it. Through time, but it's the same act, right? And so if you're not mesmerized by the present right now, then you wouldn't be mesmerized by nothingness giving rise to something, which is what creation ex nihilo is, right? Because that's what's happening now. Nothingness sort of coming, or sort of newness coming from something that it's not, and that's what I think Balthasar is saying is the future. The future, oddly, is a type of newness that comes from something that's not. Now, it's not entirely the same as creation ex nihilo, because there is a trajectory from the past, but it's a trajectory that's a situation that can be entirely new. Last thing, and then I'll go, and you'll go too, is the last example of this was brought up in Neoplatonism in Trinity class. Rich has mentioned this live album between Thelonious Monk and John Coltrane. And apparently John Coltrane was addicted to heroin. And in this live album recording, they were jamming away on some really great jazz, and John Coltrane fell asleep in the middle of the song. And I listened to this. This actually is true. You can find this on YouTube. Which means it's got to be true, right? Because that's like abstract. That's God's eye view on reality. Okay? So, and then all of a sudden they're playing, and then you can hear Thelonious Monk say, "Coltrane!" And then all of a sudden he comes in like half a beat late, but he starts playing, and it's as if like that course of events, and this is what's so puzzling about human nature. That course of events that got set by the fact that he fell asleep because of his heroin addiction, led to a really great album. This is not a judgment or condoning heroin, but it led to a really great album precisely because of the fact of this like radical contingency in the moment, and that's why people like improv and improv jazz. And in a sense, this is what John Paul II says in his letter to artists: we're all